This series has covered some of the most powerful military firearms of World War I. But today we'll talk about a simple little pocket pistol that tipped the entire world into war. Hi, I'm Othais, and this is probably my only shirt now. Anyway, this is the FN model 1910 pocket pistol, and boy is it compact, so let's go ahead and let you get a closer look in the light box. Just a wee bit over 6 inches in length and weighing in at 1.3 pounds, this is a compact pocket pistol. It could be found chambered in either 32 ACP feeding 7 from its magazine or feeding 6 380 cartridges. Now I know all of you are getting a very clear, crisp look at this pistol as I wave it around in my hand, but I'm going to have to sadly put it down and cover some background history. The world's most influential firearms designer had sparked an entire market that now demanded pocket pistols for self-defense. This was begun by his innovative FN1910, first of the slide-operated pistols. Colt was jealous of those profits and got into the pocket pistol market as well. This resulted in the model 1903, which we covered last time. And as an aside, FN used a scaled-up military pattern of this same action to woo army and police contracts. If that information seems scant, you're right, it is. That's because we've already covered most of this in previous episodes. Go back, tune in, find out. Now, I want to say I have to cover one other pistol before we get to this one. It's a gap between the 1903 series and this 1910. And that is actually a 25 ACP vest pistol. Obviously derived from the 1903, this tiny handgun was a slide-operated blowback. It used a grip safety but had no manual option. And it kept the Browning concept of a front and rear sight milled directly into the top of the slide. He showed this prototype to both Colt and FN sometime around 1905, and by 1906, FN was producing a nearly unchanged version. Originally, these left off the manual safety just like the prototype, but one was added in 1908. Colt would follow with their own model 1908 vest pistol. This resulted in both companies for the first time producing a nearly identical pistol in the same cartridge, truly testing that negotiated truce. Now, a number of these 25 ACP pocket pistols would be carried over the course of the war, designed by many manufacturers. But at absolute best, these were high officer trinkets, and while they are interesting, nearly all of them are just derivatives of larger 32 ACP systems. So I'm sorry to say we are not going to be going into detail on specific 25 ACP pocket pistol models that may or may not have been swept up into World War I. There's a number of countries that did buy them very definitively in small numbers. We mentioned this with, like, say, the Steyr Piper. But realistically, while you can occasionally find one on some officer's hip, they're not combat pistols. I know the 32 ACP doesn't seem like it should be either, but they were broadly bought and issued and were used as martial handguns. So that's our line, guys. Don't worry, I'll mention 25 ACPs because almost all of them are derivatives of some other model as we deal with the real model, but we're not going to be dragging that out on the range. It's just not that relevant to the show. Disappointment aside, let's stop and regroup one last time and see what specifically WWI was offering right before this guy. They have a 32 ACP pocket pistol in the 1900, a 9mm military handgun in the 1903, and a new 25 ACP vest pistol in the 1906. Notably, one of these things is now no longer like the others. One of these things is suddenly extremely dated by comparison. The 1900 had done amazingly well, but there were competitors entering the market. They needed to stay innovative, and so they would return to John Browning to see if he had any new ideas. And boy did he. Working with Colt on the 1903 had given him some very hard lessons, especially because of the difficulties in introducing his 9mm version of the pistol. 2 episodes back, we got to see this guy, the FN1903, a big blowback pistol pushing the limits of what you can operate without a locking action. And so Browning, as part of that, had developed the 9mm now called Browning Long. It wasn't so long then because he's going to introduce a short cartridge in just a moment. And that short cartridge is, well, okay, let's walk it back. Colt has experimental locked breech pistols for military contract. They're in 38 ACP, a hard-hitting little cartridge that we're going to talk about later. He dials that back to get 9mm Browning Long, and now he needs to dial it back again because what he ultimately wants is a 9mm cartridge that he can fit into a frame like this, interchangeably with 32 ACP, a gun that he can offer in 2 available cartridges right from manufacturer with minimum impact. His 380 ACP, or 9x17mm cartridge, did split the difference between 9mm Browning Long and 32 ACP. This was also a truly rimless cartridge, head spacing off the case mouth. Still milder in power, it offered some improvement over 32 ACP, while utilizing the same general handgun actions and designs. A big part of the design work had come from the trouble with making the Colt 1903 into the model 1908 that we discussed last time. In doing so, they realized that it wouldn't be as simple as just swapping the barrel. To get a Colt 1903 in 380, you have to swap the barrel bushing when they still had them, a new magazine, and you have to modify that magazine well to take the new magazine. That, of course, is working from 32 up to 380. Now that, of course, is from a manufacturing perspective. There are ways, if you have the Colt 1908, to get a 32 ACP barrel and magazine in there. You can't really go the other way very easily. I don't know why you'd want to, but regardless, it was a headache. And also, every time you have a different part that you need to substitute, it adds more complexity to the assembly process, manufacturing process. That represents itself as cost, and you lose profits, okay? So the ideal here is that if we want to be able to swap one particular design like this one for either a 32 or a 380 depending, is to build everything in such a way that you just change one part, that barrel. Everything else could stay the same and we would save the maximum amount of money. In this regard, the 32 380 system is very comparable to what we know in the modern times as 40 Smith & Wesson, in which you're trying to come up with a cartridge that allows you to use the same frame as a 9mm, but get a 40 into that frame, therefore not having to manufacture a completely different frame for a third caliber, because a lot of people like to offer 9 and 45, and they didn't want to build a whole new system around 10mm. That's a whole other discussion. I'm sure you guys would love to argue with each other in the comments about that. Anyway, all of this was on Browning's mind when he developed this next prototype. Appearing sometime around 1908, it is an extremely compact and modern-looking pistol. It sported the integrated sights of the earlier 1901 patent and later the Vest pistol, again, see our Colt episode, and the bore was lowered to a minimum by wrapping the recoil spring around the barrel. It had a manual safety that notched into the slide, again, like the earlier 1901 prototype. Nobody wants to listen to Browning about sights and safeties, apparently. A bayonet-style bushing was fitted at the front with split-screw style notches for disassembly. FN opted to change the safety back to a Vest pistol style, likely saving resources in production. They also knurled the surface of the barrel bushing to allow thumb pressure to turn it for disassembly instead of having to have a special split key. Although the notches were also retained for a while because, hey, the key is easier than your thumb when you have it. But otherwise, the design was left unmolested. FN would brand their new pistol Le Nouveau Modèle. Very original marketing, guys. Anyway, after the war, they would have to come back and retroactively name it something else because it wasn't the new model anymore, and that would become the model 1910, despite the fact that it was patented in 1909, and production didn't really get moving until 1912. So don't always trust the name, gentlemen. But regardless, we now have our pistol in hand. We should probably take a closer look. Hey, that is extremely compact. Now, just going on the outside of things, we have our grip safety. We have a manual safety on the other side. This will also serve for the takedown in a moment. We have our sights milled directly into the slide and beautifully textured. This is fantastic, very compact. Small and hard to read, don't get me wrong, but it's certainly not going to snag on anything. And then, if we look, it's very, very small. I got a finger hanging off. We'll see how Mae feels about that in a moment. And otherwise, very sleek design. I mean, look at the bore axis on this. I mean, it's just barely above my finger. That means nice, easy recoil, a delight to shoot. And then also we've lost some of that height that we've seen on previous guns. And especially if you think about the most compact Browning we've talked about so far is the Colt 1903. That is a very small gun. These both shoot the same cartridge. Now, remember, Colt did increase the size just so they could get some more comfort on it, but I'm telling you, this is still fairly comfortable, even as compacted as it is. Now, we do have the dreaded heel release, so pull back, pop out, and I know that seems awkward when I'm doing it for the camera. It's not as bad in the field. We'll see Mae. There is our 32 ACP 7-shot magazine with our holes in the side so we can see what's going on without necessarily opening the whole thing up and weakening it. And then, oh, by the way, sorry guys, I took the magazine out and I didn't even show you. This gun, again, civilian style, no automatic hold open. All right, so we'll get that mag out of there. And then we'll flip this guy around. Takedown, like I said, we have a notch. Don't skip ahead though, because at the front is that accursed bayonet style barrel bushing. Now, it's easier to take this off now, not that you can't do later, but I like to do it first because it leaves the spring as little compressed as possible. It has a knurled surface that you can push and turn. It's still pretty severe to try to do with your bare fingers. There's notches here and here so that you could take a key and set the key down in there and twist. Again, I don't have one of those. Instead, I just have a regular screwdriver, well, hollow ground. I'm just going to set it in one of these notches and then turn her around about 90 degrees. Be careful not to chip up the front of the finish, kind of keep her at an angle. And then she's under spring pressure, so be aware that she is going to come out with some level of, I'm containing the spring, guys. There we go. Okay, there's our bushing. Dun-dun-dun. There's our central wraparound, beautiful concentric spring. And we can go to the rest of the takedown, which is much like the 1903. We just set this guy into the notch. So we're notched there. We twist our barrel, and then we release our notch and let this slide off to the front, and everything is apart. Now, I will say one point of caution. This, as you can see, dun-dun-dun, secret, patented plastic pokey hand. This is a striker fired pistol. This is not an internal hammer pistol. And as part of that, the striker should maintain itself where it's at. But let me tell you, if you catch it by accident on your hand or aren't paying a lot of attention, you can have the risk of shooting this thing off into the distance and possibly breaking your firing pin. Please be careful disassembling. And again, you can tell Mae's had this on the range before we filmed this segment because it's all got schmutz in it. But otherwise, a beautiful system, very compact. I think at this point, it's probably time to just go ahead and skip over the animation so you can actually see what's going on down inside this thing. First up, let's load up the magazine, and then rack the slide. Note that this is a striker-fired pistol. The trigger and sear arrangement, along with that striker, go back to Browning's original FN1910. In the ultimate bid to efficiency, it also doubles as our ejector. A 2 John Moses Browning. The grip safety returns in this design, again just blocking the sear from rotating. The manual safety actually locks the grip safety rearward, creating the same exact effect. There is also a magazine safety, which prevents fire when a magazine is not inserted in the pistol. Last but not least, let's appreciate the barrel concentric recoil spring, providing a low bore axis, compact slide, and even return pressure on the system. Alright, let's get this gun over to Mae. You know, I rather like this little guy, but that does not mean that it saw any real love before the war. You're talking about coming in late 1912 to an already flooded market, and while very advanced and modern, it's not quite revolutionary. It's not amazing by comparison to what else is available. So, not a ton of attention. Certainly no military contracts. However, while we're on the topic of revolutions, from 1875 to 1877, history would see the Serbian peoples of Herzegovina and Bosnia rise up against Ottoman rule. They would succeed, partially, in their endeavors, but the Berlin Congress of 1878 would put the regions under Austro-Hungarian governance while nominally still ruled by the Ottomans. What they had wanted was union with Serbia and Montenegro, a proto-Yugoslavia. In 1908, Austria-Hungary would do away with the sort of farce and just formally annex the region. This did not make people very pleased with Austria-Hungary. Let me tell you, if you cast off one ruler and you end up with another non-native ruler, that doesn't really fulfill your itch for a national liberation and single identity new state. Sorry guys, maybe you should have thought that one through a little bit more clearly, because instead Austria-Hungary sort of inherits the revolution itself. And as part of this, there is a grassroots organization of intrigue, espionage, and assassination known as Unification or Death, more popularly known as the Black Hand. This secret organization, formed in 1911 by officers from the Kingdom of Serbia, made a fair habit of assassinating uncooperative politicians and monarchs. Most notably, they had assassinated King Alexander Obrenović. This assassination was part of a coup that shifted Serbian monarchy from being Austria-Hungary allied to more closely involved with the Russians and French. The Black Hand would also have a Bosnian youth wing, which recruited, among others, Gavrilo Princip. These youths were given 4 FN Model 1910 pistols, all in .380 and purchased out of Belgrade, along with several homemade bombs. Their mission was to assassinate the then Austrian Archduke Franz Ferdinand, the presumptive heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, as he toured Sarajevo. Security was light as the Archduke wanted to show confidence. His planned route was known, and the conspirators set up 7 men along the route. In the morning, the first acted, throwing a bomb at his car, but it went wide and bounced under the trailing vehicle, where it detonated and wounded but did not kill. Now you would think if someone threw a bomb at you and missed, and you were in a town of people that you were very unpopular with, you would want to get the heck out of there. Not so for Franz Ferdinand. Instead, it only slightly changed his plans. As a matter of fact, I've heard that they didn't even call out additional reinforcements of soldiers because they did not have their dress uniforms. Anyway, the Archduke would go to City Hall, and from there it was realized that they should just go over to the governor's palace. This changed plans a bit, and in the course there were several other maybe possibilities for other actors, but with all the panic and everything going on, there just wasn't, nobody struck, right? Well, on the ride to the governor's palace, his driver, who was now on an unfamiliar route, made a wrong turn and had to turn down an alley and then stop and back up to get back onto the road. And in that little action, he coincidentally, and this is a coincidence that set the world on fire, passed right by Gavrilo Princip, who finally had his moment, standing not 5 feet from the Archduke. And so he would draw his FN 1910 and fire, killing the Archduke and his wife. Now, we all know what happens after that. It's not as immediate as you'd think, but there's a series of highly politicized negotiations, and it's not entirely unfair because Serbia did have a hand in this, but through a number of political failures after this incident, war were declared. There's been a lot of talk about the fact that this war was probably unavoidable in certain regards because of the nebulous network of treaties, the sort of retribution-based network of alliances, and honestly, rising nationalism, cultural identities, things like this are starting to boil over. People want their own governance. We still have old empires that are creaking at the knees. It was set up to go off. I mean, this isn't the gasoline, this is the spark. But let me tell you, an FN1910 was the spark for this conflict. And so in that regard, it may be the most significant gun we talk about in the course of this series. By the way, for many years it was believed the FN1900 was used in the assassination. But that actually stems from the fact that the name Browning was nearly synonymous with pistol at that time in history. Add on to it that this was a Browning pistol, and it's clear how, when it was reported a Browning pistol was used, people thought of the more common and established Model 1900. But I know what you guys are thinking now. You shot the gun in 32 ACP, but the greatest event of this design's life was in 380. Alright. Once the war kicked off, these guns still saw some service. They had been fairly popular in private sales, and certainly officers of many nations were able to purchase them and carry them just fine before the war and then on into the war, excepting of course for the fact that production was halted after Germany invaded. And as part of that, just like with our previous, 2 episodes ago episode on the FN1903, when Germany seized the Fabrik National plant, they refused to produce. So equipment was seized for production, and then any completed pistols were taken into inventory and then offered for sale back to officers. If you happen to be a German officer who wanted a compact handgun for your own use coming out of the prestigious Belgian firm, you could have it for 25 marks. But I have only seen records of them in 380. Now, the German invasion had halted these guys around serial number 70,000, which is a fair few to be out in the world to at least possibly make it into the conflict, and it's estimated maybe 2,000 were taken into German inventory. Not the biggest hitter once the conflict kicks off, but certainly, like I said, the spark. Now, there's something interesting about that 380 number. The German inventory shows these were in 380, right? The problem is, in Europe especially, these were very popular in 32 ACP, and there are many, many more found in 32 ACP than 380 of these early models. I mean, a radical number more. They were not nearly as popular in 380. To my mind, that says that the retreating Belgians likely took some along, although I have not found any evidence whatsoever. So, just something to keep your eye out for. Anybody that's digging in the archives or looking at photos, I'd be very curious to see if any of these stayed with the Belgians that got out of there, or if maybe it just turned out that more privately people lunchboxed these in 32 more often than 380. Or maybe there's a piece of German paperwork that nobody's turned up yet that actually says that they were for sale in 32 as well. All these are possible. It's just an interesting gap, especially when you consider how unpopular 380 was. Alright, moving on. Post-war, the Model 1910 would flow again, and entered Belgian service this time as the 1900 model was retired completely. Belgian orders would continue until the 1930s, when it was replaced by something we'll cover much, much later in this show. These, plus commercial sales, would reach 460,000 made before, Germany invaded again. Geez guys, let up a bit. Again, they would serve much the same role in World War II that they did in World War I, although in more significant numbers. You tend to see these with capture papers fairly often. Now, after that war, production kicked off again and lasted this time until the early 1970s, which is a testament to how future-proof and modern this design was when it came out. I want to point out, low bore axis, concentric spring, striker-fired, 2 cartridges available from the factory, pocketable, milled in sights, you know, quick draw, blah, blah, blah. Very finely done. Grip safety, also, just so you know, there is a magazine disconnect in this gun as well. These are all modern features. And in a lot of regards, you don't get a pocket pistol comparable to this one until the later 20s from other manufacturers. And still, without going into Wonder 9 developments and very modern polymers and things like that, you're sort of pushing the limit of what you can get out of a slim, compact pocket pistol with this blowback design. Absolutely stunning. Now, after World War I, despite its limited use before and during, this thing would really shine as a police pistol. Here, users of the FN1910 system included the Dutch Armed Forces, French and Syrian police, Australian postmen, Finnish police, Japanese army officers, those German seizures in World War II I mentioned, and also we're going to see countries like Canada, Burundi, Nigeria, Rwanda, Venezuela, Peru, and more. I should also point out that the gun's role was expanded, literally, by lengthening the pistol. You see, Yugoslavia had requested that they get this thing in a more military length barrel, and the machine that cuts the slide was at its limit. So FN had to sit there and go, do we want to build a new machine and change what we're doing, or do we want to save some pennies? And they decided to save pennies. So what they would have to do is just extend the front of the slide with a special cap, and then that would give them the ability to produce an entirely new model. This resulted in the 1910-22, which stood for 1922, which puts this well beyond our reasonable scope today. We'll talk more about these guns later when we can get out and shoot them. Alright, we're starting to wrap the history up here, but let's turn from the general to the very specific, because I told you about Gavrilo Princip's pistol. And this is a very interesting story that I picked up from Vanderlinden, who is listed below. Again, I've said this before, but this man has done a beautiful job with FN's history, not just in pistols, but rifles. Look up every book he's got on every possible site. Buy them if you care about any of these gun designs or just good gun writing in general. We always rely on authors, and I want to thank them for their efforts, and I think that you guys can do that financially by just buying the books and enjoying them, because they're so much more in depth than this show. This is just a thin layer of ice that is the tundra of gun information. Alright, regardless, let's get back to work. Through him, we know that there were 4 pistols with several of the conspirators, and when everybody was arrested, they all came into inventory with the police, and then they sat in evidence and then for the trial. And so, here's the thing. The man I trust most with his opinion on this says that he cannot find a scrap of paper that says exactly which pistol was Princeps. I know that there are claims of an Austrian museum that has the gun. That is definitely one of the guns. And I'm not sure how many of the guns that museum even has. Something to look into. I'm sure some of you might even know. If they have all 4, then somewhere in there is Princeps' pistol. But to my knowledge, there's no way to know which one precisely. So you got a 1 in 4 chance of finding the gun that started the war. And also, by the way, if you notice that they're in poor condition, no, he didn't carry around a rusty pistol. It's because they were stored in a private collection / church collection that was more like a shrine, and then made it over to the museum, and in the intervening years, they were not very well kept. But let's talk about those serial numbers. From the trial records, the serials are as follows. But obviously 2 of those stand out. Vanderlinden believes that these were mistyped on the record, and I agree with him. Corrected, they should look more like this, which makes a whole heck of a lot more sense and puts the dates right, and aligns with shipping records from the factory. Now, I'm pretty sure all 4 of those pistols are snugged up in a collection in Europe, but I don't know for sure. I only know of the one that's on display, and I've heard that there's 2 that were retained. I've never seen somebody write all 4 in one place right now. So, if you get a second, check your serial number. Sorry guys, they're probably all safe and sound, but it's just, wouldn't it be neat? Anyway, that aside, we have this specific pistol to talk about now, and we need to see from Mae how she felt about actually handling this thing in the context of an entire world on fire. Alright, once more, same as before, we've made room for Mae, and we have another tiny Browning pistol. If you guys are getting tired of these, don't worry. This is the last one of the Brownings until much later. And I'm sure you will all be happy about that episode. So, let's get into some detail on this, the FN1910, perhaps the most advanced pocket pistol of the war. It's time for Mae's opinion, though, on whether or not that holds true. So let's get into what is probably the most distinguishing feature of this gun, the ergonomics.
It's so wee! Look at it, it's super tiny. This is adorable for a pistol. Pistols shouldn't be adorable. I don't know why, it just is. I'm sorry, I don't even know where that comes from. Anyway, yeah, super tiny, yet I'm still able to get a full finger grip, so it can be done, 32s, which some of you haven't done it for me before. Look at what you could have been. Shame. Anyway. Yeah, full finger grip. I appreciate that. It's nice, it's sleek, it's thin, like, it's so compact. I mean, it's because of that concentric spring in the striker fire. They were really able to just make this, they were just able to, like, size it down. It's fantastic. I love that. Yeah, other bits, heel releases. This one's not bad, don't get me wrong, I can operate it, but I did notice on range, when I was trying to release the heel, it actually backs out towards your hand a little bit back here, so if you don't stick it out from your palm a little bit, you will be fighting against yourself in order to release that. So keep that in mind. That is a small flaw that I actually did experience the 2 times I dropped the mag on this guy, which wasn't my favorite. The grip safety on this one, it's nice and positive. I don't think it's any different from the Colt 1903, honestly. It's pretty, yeah, I don't have to white knuckle that at all. The safety back here, however, like with the Colt 1903, I do have to kind of change my grip up a little bit in order to manipulate it, which is annoying. I prefer it like the FN1903, where I kind of just have it right here and can just flip my thumb up and down. But beggars can't be choosers. It at least works, and I can still manipulate it without having to reach around with my other hand, which is nice. A slide, it is a little bit stiffer, I would say. It just feels like that spring is a little bit tighter in there, honestly. But it's still not bad. It's definitely still easy to operate, still very smooth. You know, this is actually, it's a very compact little shooter. It's neat. It's adorable. It really it's just super adorable.
Yeah, this is probably the World War I all-time winner of concealed carry 32 ACPs. Like, that thing is sleek, compact, and absolutely tiny.
And it wins the Adorable Award.
Yeah, it's a good thing it comes with a holster, because I feel like I would lose mine if I had that thing.
Right? You could just put it in your pockets.
Alright, so we do know, however, that a lot of mouse guns, little teeny tiny 32 and 380s, and this, by the way, was offered in 380, and we've tested it in 380. A lot of those little tiny guns, they don't do so well when you actually pull the trigger, because you now have the problems of equal and opposite reaction, and you do not have a lot of mass in the gun. So, does this hold up on range? Does it end up beating your hand up, or does it do what it's supposed to do?
Before I get into that little bit, first off, the sights. And these are possibly some of the tiniest sights I have ever had to shoot. I mean, what is this, a sight for ants? Seriously, they're super tiny. Don't like that. This is definitely a point shooter, guys. The trigger on this guy, it is much better. It actually is definitely better than the FN1903 and the Colt 1903. There is a little lope in there, I did notice, but it is smoother. The break is clean. I really did appreciate this trigger. It was much better. Now the recoil. 32, definitely not a problem. You know, 32 ACP out of this gun, it felt right. It felt like it fit the guy. 380 did have a little more of a snap to it. However, that being said, I still didn't think it was that unmanageable. Like, I actually thought it was still all right. Like, if I hadn't just shot 32 out of it and only shot 380, I probably would have thought that 380 fit the gun just as well. But I feel like this deep rake in here was able to get a nice grip, and I've got a full finger grip. There's still a good bit of weight here. All of that being said, and the low bore access, it just added to that recoil mitigation that I just appreciated. So for me, yeah, I could tell 380 was a little snappier, but that's about it. It was still easy. And as far as shooting goes, I was still dang accurate with both of them. So yeah, for a shooter, Sights suck. Everything else about it, not so bad.
Yeah, I've actually had the opportunity to shoot this gun as well, and I will say that it feels probably better than the heavier, larger Beretta 34 and 380. And a lot of that has to do with, just like May said, the bore axis. In this case, because of the concentric spring, the barrel is lowered way down, right up against the top of my finger, essentially. And that means that there just isn't a lot of overhand leverage to tip this gun back. You're taking it right down the arm. So you get your arm out there, especially in a nice locked one-handed stance. Or if we tried to shoot this more modernly with a two-handed, it's still possible because it's another Browning design that makes it compatible with modern shooting. It does a very good job of mitigating what can't be avoided when you have a gun this small and a cartridge like 380, which, although designed for blowback, is still more potent than 32. So, all that being said, how confident do you really feel with something like this in the Great War?
Yeah, actually, you know what? This shot well. I shot well with it. It didn't have any malfunctions or misfires on range. I've got 32 or 380, which, you know, both cartridges not the best, but they're certainly not the worst. And I've said yes to 32s before. I'll say it again. I would take this one into battle. Actually, you know what? Out of the 32s, I'd probably put this one around number 3. I think it's definitely under the Savage and the Colt 1903, but it definitely earned that number 3 spot. It was just that dang decent. Like I said, only complaints are the cartridge and the sights. Other than that, it was actually pretty good. It was pretty decent. I almost wish I could conceal carry this guy, but not the best for modern times, I suppose.
No, I'm not entirely confident, man. I'm not entirely confident with the gun, but I certainly would take it. I wouldn't, if I had this, I wouldn't think it was going to let me down to the best of its own ability. And that's going to depend on the cartridge, and especially being able to push a 380, that's not the worst thing to defend yourself with at that time. Now, military features aside, this is a very polished, highly advanced concealed carry pistol for that day. We raved about the Colt 1903 and its abilities, but honestly, in a concealed carry sense, just as a private citizen who wants something, in your pocket, and it's, around 1910, this is a very good choice. I mean, there's nothing comparable in terms of taking up as little possible space and yet getting the maximum effect. The only problem is you're down to point shooting because these are terrible sights. And if anything goes wrong with this thing, which probably won't because it's amazing, I would not disassemble it anywhere outside, as you saw.
It's cool. For the sights, I'll just tell the enemy to stop running at 5 feet. No, you're a little far. Come on. All right, you're good there.
Yeah, it's a little bit hard to push this one out. Although, I think with some practice, you can get pretty good with it.
Probably, yeah.
Anyway, if you have an FN1910, be proud. I frankly think they're amazingly advanced. Now, that's going to wrap up our show, though. So, we will leave everybody to check for the updates after the credits. And thank you once again for joining us. And no, there's no hints for next episode. Sorry.
Bye, everybody.
Alright guys, blurry, shaky, disheveled cell phone update because I have spent the week putting my garage back together in addition to doing my show duties. 1, thank you all for your support on the t-shirts. It has been a huge help. We have new transmission in the Suburban, we have new tires on the Suburban, we have everything polished and ready to go for 2 long-range machine gun trips that we are going to be making in the next year. These will cover 2/3 of all the guns that we wanted to cover automatic-wise for the series. So I'm sure you would all be very disappointed if we accidentally ended this series with a glut of machine gun episodes piled up at the end. That would just be awful to see machine gun after machine gun after machine gun. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Now, in addition to that, I want to say that we're on schedule for t-shirts. They're in production now. Martin is a saint. Orders were much higher than expected. You guys are beautiful. As a matter of fact, the first time since the show's been going on, I actually pinched some pennies for myself. I spent $600 on myself, and since you guys provided it, I should probably tell you what I'm up to. I have a slight old hobby that I have been abandoning. I love early 80s super bikes. It's cool. I've really only retained my old GL 1100, and I love that bike. But $600, if you're careful, take your time, you can find some pretty cool, pretty odd stuff. And with a little extra effort and a little extra money on the parts, in a couple months' time, I think I'll have 120 horsepower back on the road. I wish I could do a series on this particular period of history before the truce that ended this particular war, but that's for somebody else. Alright guys, have a good one. Thanks for all the support, thanks for all the love, and I'm gonna go to bed. Bye.